day 2. Good to see all of you. Thank you for joining live. It makes it a whole lot more fun for me. All right, so today we cover chapter 1. It is essentially downloads and setup. And there's a bunch of tools I list in the book that you might want, but at the same time I'm going to trim it down substantially to really just what we need, and then also answer any questions you might have about any of the tools. We need something to do the programming in, a tool to do the programming in. These are called integrated development environments, which are typically just something like fancy text editors with a bunch of features built in and that hook up to tools to compile and run programs. So we've got two options here, and you might want to use both or just pick one. It's completely up to you. The second thing we need is what's called the software development kit, or the platform, or the framework for the programs that we're going to write. And like we talked about last time, we're using Solar 2D, which used to be called Corona SDK, and as I noted last time, is still frequently called Corona SDK, and you'll see that today. And we'll try to download Solar 2D, but what we'll get is still called Corona SDK. So don't let that confuse you. Anytime you see Corona SDK, that is correct. That is what we're using. They're in the middle of a name change to Solar 2D, so that's what's going on. So the big things that we need: Solar 2D, and I've got a link there for it. ZeroBrane Studio, or ZBS, which is a text-based IDE that's really nice. It has lots of little cool features, like code completion. Like once you start typing a little bit of code, it'll try to figure out what you might need to complete it, which is nice. It also does syntax coloring and highlighting. So if you see yourself, coding mainly using a text-based editor, ZeroBrane's probably the best choice. And I'll show you the download process in just a second. And then Drawn2Code is the version I talked about last time that I made. That's a little bit more visual in nature and lets you drag stuff around in your design and writes a lot of the code for you. And then there's textbook resources, which is, along with the textbook, every single example in there, and then lots more that are either were in an older edition of the book, or I've just added some games and stuff that I wrote, but I don't have room to cover it, in the textbook necessarily. So there's a ton of stuff in the chapter resources. Let me pause, I guess, a little bit and talk about the textbook because that's what we're talking about. I did finish this current revision, this current edition. I got it uploaded yesterday evening, but I'm still waiting on Amazon to approve it. As soon as they say it's good to go and it's ready for sale, I will put an announcement on Canvas, and then you can look at it and decide if that's something you want to get now or wait or whatever. Totally up to you. But that's the status of the book. I have been hoping that the textbook would be ready this morning so I could show you the website, or the Amazon page for it, and answer any questions that you might have. But almost certainly by Thursday, I will continue posting, drafts of the chapters electronically. So you're not behind because you don't have the textbook, nor will you fall behind, hopefully, because of that. All right. Solar 2D. So if you guys have not already done this, you can certainly follow along. Obviously, I've already done this a couple times, but Solar 2D is available via the Solar 2D homepage, which is at solar2d.com. The link is in the prior table. There we go. So you actually can go to the solar2d.com website, and you'll see this at the top, and you can click on the downloads button, which will take you to the GitHub page, which is directly linked here. It takes you to a page that says you'll be downloading the Corona SDK. I mean, that's the URL. If you look at it, it's github.com/coronalabs/coronareleases. So don't let that confuse you again. And then all you do is pick. Do you want the Mac OS version or the Windows version based on, where you're doing the development? Or if you have a multi-platform setup or multi-boot kind of setup, obviously you can download both of them, which is great for testing your apps on different platforms. The installer is different depending on the platform you have. So for Windows, you're going to download what's called a Microsoft installer or MSI file, and that'll launch this wizard where you hit next, 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 and it installs it for you. On the Mac, you'll download a DMG file, which opens into something that looks like this, and there's a folder called Corona, and you'll drag it and drop it into your applications folder, assuming that's where you put your application. So on the Mac, as is typical, there's no separate installer. It's just drag and drop. On the Microsoft version, there is an installer where you have to just hit next, next, next. And here's again where I said you'll notice in all the badging and stuff, it still says Corona Labs. So don't let that confuse you. Again, and I hope pointing it out isn't actually doing the confusing. So I'll stop. Okay, and then so ZeroBrane has essentially it's shareware or donationware. Let me switch over to screen sharing and show you what it looks like. So this is what ZeroBrane looks like. It's a very minimalistic kind of tool, and I've already typed some code in, which we'll type in a second. But I wanted to show you what it looks like. This is the text editing pane. So if you're typing code in, this is where you would type it. And save it. There's a run button. The only setup that you have to do is to tell it to use the Corona or Solar 2D version of the Lua runtime rather than the built-in standard version. And so you do that by pulling down the project menu, and then at the very bottom the option is Lua Interpreter, and it defaults to one of these Luas. And those are awesome, but Lua by itself doesn't have any of the mobile application tools and libraries. So you can't code mobile apps in Lua. You need to select the Corona interpreter. And again, it still says Corona. I'm sure it'll be updated to Solar 2D at some point, but for the time being, it just says Corona, and that's what you want. If you're following along and trying to do that, or if you try to do it, it won't tell you if that worked or didn't work, which is kind of annoying. But the first time you try to use it, you'll know whether it works or not. So I'm going to wait till we get to, I'm trying to think what's the most sensible thing to do. Yeah, let's wait till we actually test our Hello World app, and then you guys can tell me if your copies are not working, and I'll show you what the fix is. Okay, and then Drawn2Code is easy as well. What you download it's actually the same kind of thing. You download a Microsoft installer file. What you download will be password protected on both platforms, and the password to decrypt your download is get beta demo. The Microsoft version will run through an installer where you click next, next, next. It's actually Oracle's default Windows installer, and it's not awesome. I really don't like it, actually. It doesn't let you pick where it installs it, and it installs it in a really weird place on Windows, or at least to me on Windows. And the one thing to make it helpful for you on Windows is what I've highlighted here, which is after the installer finishes, the Microsoft Windows installer finishes installing the Drawn2Code IDE, it will actually launch it, which I don't love. I mean, it shouldn't really launch software without your approval, but it does launch it. And actually that's nice because finding it later is tough. And you're better off if once it launches and you see it on screen, you pin it to your Windows taskbar. That way you can launch it easily again every time you want to. So anyway, that's a Windows issue. The Mac version does not have an issue with that at all. There is some basic configuration with Drawn2Code available through that settings or gear kind of icon. And for the most part, the options are very similar on Windows and the Mac. Obviously, the UI is slightly different. This is a Java app, and so it tries to look more like a native app on any platform it runs on. But for the most part, these 4 settings look the same. I would probably stick with the default settings for file handling. Application zoom is nice if when you launch Drawn2Code, it looks tiny. That's just because Java sometimes handles these high resolution, Retina kind of displays well, and then others not so well. So if you have the room and you want stuff to look a little bigger, you can zoom in on the application. For instance, I normally run mine at 125%, which is, I don't know if you can read that or not, but that's what it's set at. And you can play around with that. The only thing is you have to quit Drawn2Code and restart it to see the change. And you can always check for updates on Drawn2Code. It does not check automatically, and I will normally announce if there's a new version out. But if you really want to, you can check for updates as well. And if it finds an update, it'll send you to the download page. There's a little bit of setup on Windows to do. All right, so if you're on a Mac, you can just kind of tune this out. Go reheat your coffee or whatever. There is a little bit of extra Windows setup. I need to be able to launch the Solar 2D or the Corona SDK device simulator. That's the tool that will read in the Lua Corona Solar 2D program that you've designed and run it so that you can test it and see what it looks like. So on the Mac, I just say launch the Corona simulator, and it launches the Corona simulator. It doesn't matter what folder I put it in, what it was named, anything. I cannot find a similar feature on Windows. So the easiest workaround is just to have you show me where on your Windows computer the Corona SDK has been installed. On Windows, you'll have this extra config button. And I use this sort of sun icon to make you think of Solar 2D or Corona or whatever. That button's not there on the Mac. So sometimes I have people panicking at this point and saying, well, I don't see the button. If you're on Windows, you'll see that button. If you click it, you'll get a kind of a regular file dialog, and it's just asking you to find the coronasimulator.exe. What you'll need to do is literally just navigate to where that is on your computer. So it's usually inside of your program files. Typically, there's a folder that says something like Corona SDK. All you're trying to find is this file, coronasimulator.exe. Again, it's Windows only. Once you select it and hit open, your configuration on Drawn2Code will be complete. So we're still not guaranteed your setup works. And so essentially on a day like this, what we do is we download stuff, we try to get it set up, and then we test it. And so that's the next step is let's test it. So we're going to create the first app that you traditionally create in any new language or IDE is called the Hello World app, and all it does is try to say Hello World. So essentially you're trying to make your language produce a greeting, Hello World. And if it does that, then you know you've got everything hooked up correctly, and then you can actually start learning stuff, more actual programming stuff. I just encourage you to try maybe ZBS and Drawn2Code to see if there's one approach you like better than the other. But again, neither is a requirement. So if you already know you're not going to use either one of these, or if you know you're not going to use ZBS, obviously, or you're not going to use Drawn2Code, you don't have to follow along, with the install and the test if you've already decided no, that's not for me. starting with ZeroBrane Studio or ZBS. There are several steps. Let me read over them because once I switch to screen sharing, you won't be able to see this. Obviously, you launch ZeroBrane Studio. I just showed it to you running a second ago. You create a new document. You can use the file menu, or there's a toolbar button to do this. You enter the line of code that you want to enter. It is the line of code from the prior slide that says print, open parenthesis, quote, hello world, quote, close parenthesis. That's it. It's one small line of code. One of the first tricks is on step 4 here. You need to save it and name it main.lua. So all of our runnable apps will be called main.lua. Main.lua just tells Lua, and therefore Solar2D, that this is the script to start running. Doesn't mean you can't have other Lua scripts or divide your project up in a more complex manner. That's not saying that at all. It's just saying this is how Lua works. It looks for main.lua and runs it. The problem, I don't know if it's a problem. The issue to me is ZeroBrane doesn't call it main.lua. It calls it, I think it calls it untitled.lua, which is fine, but it kind of implies then that you can title it whatever you want, and you can't. You have to name it main.lua. Drawn2Code doesn't give you this flexibility. It just saves it as main.lua. I have an export feature built in. If you wanted to export it to another name, that's fine. But by default, it just names it main.lua because that's what you have to name it. It has to be capitalized and spelled like that, so main.lua. Step 5, you might need to set the project folder in ZeroBrane to the current file. And so wherever that main.lua file is, whatever folder it's in, you want to set that to be the project folder. And so it's actually pretty easy to do it. In ZBS, there's a toolbar button that looks like this. I don't know if you guys can see that really well. Not with my highlighter over it. It is, I believe it's the 5th from the left. And so I'll show you that as well when I switch back over to screen sharing. And then you just hit the run button or choose file run. So 6 steps to your first ZeroBrane program. I'm just going to start from scratch. Here's the new, I don't know where my tooltip went to, but that's my new document. And you can see here by default, ZeroBrane calls it untitled.lua. So we'll need to write our line of code. So the line of code we're writing is just the word print, open parenthesis, and then in quotes, hello world, and a close parenthesis. And if you're feeling really cheerful, you can add an optional exclamation point after world, or 2, just depending on, I guess, your caffeine level at this point. I'm at a 1, so that's where I'll leave it. There's nothing else to type in terms of the program. That is a full and complete script. It's not going to do anything super exciting, but it will work. So we need to set the project folder, but we also need to save it. So let's start with saving it. All right, and so then this is where you need to rename it main.lua. You can see again, ZeroBrane has passed untitled.lua to the save dialog as its proposed name. You don't want to name it untitled.lua. That will not run. So wherever you want to save it, so this is one of your first choices. Organizing your work is more important than you might think. You would probably want to create a folder for this class and probably want to create a folder for every chapter, and then probably want to create a folder for every app that you make in the chapter. Why? The biggest reason is that every program is named main.lua. And you can only have one file of a given name in a folder. So you can't easily put all of your mobile apps in the same folder. It just won't work. The main.lua files will overwrite each other. And in most chapters, as we go through them, we're going to write several apps. In class, we'll follow along step by step and do stuff, and you'll need to save it. Likewise, there's homework at the end of every chapter that you'll want to do. And you can't put all of these in the same folder because in the end, each program is named main.lua. The only way you can organize that is by putting it in separate folders and then giving those folders descriptive names like mobile development class and then chapter 1 and then a folder called Hello World would make sense, something like that. Totally up to you. It's not something I check or enforce or anything, but you want to give some thought to how do I want to save the work so that I can come back and find it really easily. I'm just going to save it in my documents folder, but I'm going to type over the name and call it main.lua. That's the biggest thing to do. I'm going to save it. I'm going to replace it because I already did this earlier. Then I also told you need to set the project folder. So the project folder is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's the fifth one over from the left. The tooltip says set project directory from current file. So as long as your cursor is flashing in the script that you want to run, you just press that button. And that will that'll tell ZeroBrane that yes, that's the file that you want to run. Okay, and then the run button is this one with the two green triangles side by side. And it's if you're watching, your taskbar or your dock, you might have noticed that you've got a little icon that's orange and white that showed up. That's the Corona simulator. And then if everything worked perfectly, you should see down here at the console it says Hello World. That's what the print statement does. It just spits text out to the console. We'll use the console to sort of help us debug stuff, to figure out if something's running that we think is running, or a loop is looping as many times as we want, or the console can be helpful to let us peek inside what our script is doing more closely. Anyway, there are a variety of things that could have gone wrong here. And so I'm kind of looking at your faces trying to figure out if somebody looks especially confused. Did anybody run into any issues? Okay, just really briefly then, the other error you can get is a message down here that says, essentially, ZeroBrane cannot find the Corona SDK. It's annoying because you did install it, and you did choose Corona in ZeroBrane. For whatever reason, ZeroBrane looks for the Corona SDK in a particular folder with a particular name, and it's not the name that it installs it, that Corona or Solar 2D installs it into by default. So if you get that error, there's little instructions in the textbook chapter, but you just have to rename the folder Corona was installed into so that it matches where it says in the error message it's looking for it. If you're not getting that error and you see at the console it says Corona simulator started, this information about the simulator, I'm running 2020.3635, and then it should say Hello World. If it just says Hello World, that means you're not running it in the Corona simulator, which means you need to go back up to the project menu and pick your Lua interpreter as what is called Corona at this point. All right, let me switch to Drawn2Code then, and we'll do the Drawn2Code example. All right, so when you launch Drawn2Code, it should look something like this. It's just an empty design window. And Drawn2Code is geared to, like I showed you in the brief introduction, in the last Zoom, you picking stuff to draw or picking widgets and plopping them in your design and moving them around and getting it to look like what you want it to look like. It's not really geared to just writing a simple print statement. That said, you can enter any code you want in a snippet. I have some kind of default snippets built in for help, but then there's just this new snippet button. If you click that, you'll get an object in your stack which is called a snippet, and it's empty. Let me just zoom in so you can see maybe what it will look like. So in your stack you would see snippet, new snippet. You can name the snippet whatever you want. So I'll call it Hello World. You do not have to name it. That's just to help you when you look at your stack. When you have lots of stuff in the stack, it makes it easier to find what you're looking for if it has a name that you set that you'll recognize. But it is not required. And then here's the code that'll be in the snippet. You can either type it right here, or what I normally do in class is I'll hit this breakout button to give me a bigger editor window that I can zoom in on. That way my text is big enough that you guys can actually see it on my screen in the Zoom, and hopefully it's also large enough that people can see in the recording. If you find me typing and talking about text that I'm typing and I haven't done this, please feel free to speak up and say, we can't see what you're doing. Or what normally is the case is I'll be typing stuff in and I'll be in the slide on the slide still, and you'll need to say you're still on the slide. You need to switch to your screen share, or whatever the case may be. In any event, what you type is exactly the same. Print, open parenthesis, hello world, an exclamation point if you're in the mood. Otherwise, leave it off. That's it. You might have noticed when you were typing, it's inserting it in the code here as well. You can dismiss that pop-out window. The next part of the process would be you want to save it, probably. So there is a big save button, and then this is where you'll have the same opportunity you did in ZeroBrane to organize your work. If you did this in ZeroBrane and created a Hello World folder, you could also put this in that same folder, but it will in the end overwrite that main.lua. So you probably want to create a unique folder for your Drawn2Code design if you're using both, and call it Hello World Drawn2Code or Hello World 2 or whatever makes sense to you. And then you'll save your design as a name. So what we're saving here is the Drawn2Code design. It's not the script file, it's a design. It's this stack of script objects. You can call it whatever you want. This does not have to be called main.lua. So you can call it Hello World. It can have a space in it. Anything that's a valid file name on the computer you're using, you can name it that. It will save it in your file system with a .d2c extension, which is to link it to Drawn2Code. But it's as simple as that. That will save the design and set the project folder. You'll notice there's no run button. And I do that on purpose is because you don't run the design. You run the script file that your design generates. If the script file is updated, if it's resaved or if it's modified, optionally Corona can reload the script file, which is really in general what you want. I mean, if you make changes to your design and you save it, you would then probably want to see the changes on screen and not have to take an extra step of asking Corona to reload it. But we'll get to that in the future. To run it from Drawn2Code, you gotta generate the code. the main.lua file. So hit the Generate Code button, and that will open this window with the code that's generated for this design right here. So this object1 script object in your stack generates this line of code right here. This is what you run. You run the main.lua file, and you can see it's already been saved in the project folder as main.lua. So you can't flub that part up. All you have to do is hit run. That will launch the Corona simulator like this. There we go. The Corona simulator simulates a device of your choosing. You can pick different devices. They're up in the window menu, window view as. You can pick any of these devices that you might like, or a custom one. But in any event, you might be looking at this and thinking, wait a minute, did it run? I don't even know if it ran. There's nothing in the on the phone. But again, print doesn't put anything on the phone. Print displays stuff at the console. So if you look down at your console, you should see Hello World. After that point, you can close the generated code window. And then from that point forward, as you change your design and save the design, Drawn2Code will also resave the main.lua file, which will then tell Corona to reload the script file, so it'll be more seamless. Let me get back to the keynote then. All right. So the keynote steps you through what we just did live, but there's the ZeroBrane, which you should have seen, something like that. Drawn2Code steps. It didn't read through, but this is what we did. We launched it. We created a new design. We created the code snippet. We entered the one line of code in the snippet. Step 5, we saved the design in a folder that made sense to us. We hit the Generate Code button in step 6. And then we hit the Run button from that window, which got us to our design. These are those steps visually. And then the design, or the output was, as noted right here, Hello World. All right, if you've done that, you have successfully set up your computer to develop mobile apps. That, like I said, there are a few things that can go wrong in the setup, which is why we take a day to do it. And in a face-to-face semester, I'd be walking around the room, checking your laptops and helping you with configuration issues, which I can't do easily remotely, but we will give a try. If anybody is stuck, again, I will hang on the Zoom. We can share screen. We can do other stuff to try to help you out. Otherwise, if you've got your setup done, you're ready to move on to chapter 2. But I do want to, it's not a warning, but I want to say something about chapter 2. If you're reading ahead, which is awesome, you might get to chapter 2 and think, well, yeah, it's hard to imagine what you might think. You might think this looks hard. You might think this looks tedious. If you're not used to seeing computer code, it can be a little bit confusing to look at. The thing I would say is, for chapter 2 is, it is meant to be a big high-level overview of, sorry, I'm in my book trying to get to it. It's supposed to be a big high-level overview of what it looks like to code in this Lua Corona Solar 2D environment. But there's a lot of details and rules that are discussed. The thing is, this is just meant to be a big high-level overview introduction. It is not my expectation in any way that having read this chapter or presented it to you that you all of a sudden understand how to do all of these things. That's not the goal of the chapter. Anything in there that you're going to end up needing to do, we will return to in a future chapter. And there will be activities and examples and homework to get you to master it. And then second, if you're using Drawn2Code, remember, it's going to write a lot of the code for you. So you'll be able to focus on, for instance, what do you want to happen in your app when the user presses the button? You won't have to worry about, how do I get a button on screen? How do I hook it up to a listener? How do I write the event handler? What is the correct order for this to go? All that kind of stuff. All that code will be written for you if you're using Drawn2Code. All right. So we will convene again on Thursday to get into this overview chapter. But if you're reading ahead, again, don't let it intimidate you at all. All right. Well, that's awesome. You guys are officially, if you weren't previously, you are officially mobile development programmers. You have coded your first Hello World app. Things will just get better and more fun from here once we get past chapter 2.